Hey guys, Anfield here with another BDO video to talk to you about the new Node Wars system. Now, if you've not been following the Node Wars recently, it went through a pretty major overhaul. It seemed to have stemmed from a lack of interest from the Korean server in doing any Node Wars whatsoever, and so Perlibus felt the need to radically shake up the scene for everyone. Over on NA and EU, it's pretty common to hear people asking for changes as well. So you might think, well, great, right? They're making changes, that's what we want. However, they're radically different from the general consensus that I heard time and time again, and the pros and cons of these new changes is the topic of this video. So first, let's have a look at some of the suggestions I most commonly heard from Node Warring players on the EU and NA servers. It boils down to a few key things. First, I heard a lot about deleting the alliance system. The lack of the guild identity and the ever-changing alliances has eroded inter-guild relationships, created an environment over-reliance on needing an alliance to do anything, which leads me directly to the next thing, which is the player numbers are capped way too high. 100 man is extremely excessive for any PvP for many reasons, FPS and performance, logistically, and also just how limited it makes some classes feel. Another common thing to hear was how few uncapped options you really had, with only tier 5 Node Wars offering uncapped PvP in an MMO, so the whole concept of progression in an MMO is you get gear, you feel more powerful, and then you can't use that gear. So you have 1, 2, 3, 4 all capped. While also having very few tier 5 nodes per week as well, which is extremely stale to fight on because you don't have many options, you fight on the exact same areas, usually against the same kind of people. And there was basically, and this for me it was a big one, there's like a complete lack of small scale uncapped options, such as like a 30-player cap. Finally, for another major complaint I'd hear is the politics. You need politics for a good fight, but it would put an awful extra strain on your officers of a guild or an alliance, making a lot of burnout, and that's what they had to do in order to make sure that members actually had a fight every Node War, as well as it spoiling any kind of spontaneity. There are a few more, of course, such as how annoying elephants could be and how PvE Node Wars could feel sometimes with diving recovery centers and axing forts, but I feel first that those things that I mentioned initially were sort of the major complaints I would hear most regularly. So what was changed in Node Wars? Well, quite a lot in fact. You could say that the very core of what made Node Wars, has been taken away. This is because the whole building of a base and then making sure you defend that base system has been completely done away with in favor of a system where you capture any one of varying amounts of forts placed by the system based on how many guilds are competing. You can no longer be knocked out of a Node War prematurely now by losing your fort, but conversely you could have a very short Node War if you are successful in taking a fort that has a low timer. The feedback so far has been, at best, mixed. On EU, many guilds protested the changes in a showing in Velia in the first week instead of participating for that day. I think now it's worth maybe reviewing what I see as the pros and what I see as the cons for the new system. First, let's have a look at what I view are the pros. Number 1, no longer having to engage with Diplo, at least not yet. This has been a major advantage for those leading guilds, and if nothing else, keeps the fights a bit fresher. However, it isn't to say that their meta couldn't develop around diplomacy and couldn't come back into the Node War scene, but only time will tell. Number 2, you are not out until the very end. This one is straightforward, no longer immediately being kicked out of a Node War because a guild used a quick CTG and axed your fort down before you could respond. I think that's a positive in my view. Number 3, the rewards. Now technically these rewards could have just been given to the old system and isn't really reflective of the actual mechanical changes to Node Wars, but I think it's worth a mention because I will actually bring this up again. Ultimately, PvP should be rewarding, especially in Node Wars as it's so limited anyway and could be ruinously expensive to pay for buffs. So I'm on board with serious rewards. Number 4, creative base building. I actually kind of enjoy setting up a temporary mini base near the fort that you plan to siege. I think it allows for interesting creativity. I think they should lean more into this. Number 5 is the area. This is actually a big positive for me. I really like the fact that you can fight all over a region that you're assigned to. I think it's much better than a very small node area, and it has a more epic feeling and keeps the fights a bit fresher. Let's move on to the cons. So we'll start with timers. The old Node War could last up to a max of 2 hours and could only end prematurely if you lost your base. However, this new system, the better your guild does, the less PvP you can have, simply because the forts can have very low timers, and if you capture one and are clearly a dominant guild, you may not actually have competition for your captured node, as there's no incentive for the guilds to target that fight when they could have an easier chance to win somewhere else in another fort. Number 2, I think the method to capture the forts is really bad. With the new system, in order to capture a fort, you have to be the last one to land the last hit on its HP. This is a wild way to decide who gets the fort, as your guild could do 99.9% of the damage to the fort, and then that last 0.1% could be landed by a single player from another guild, and they capture the fort. This is incredibly frustrating, and ultimately, when there are 4 guilds hitting a base at the same time, it's completely RNG. Number 3 is the rewards. That's right, it's a con. The rewards for Node Wars include a powerful life skill and PvE buffs. Now, we did have PvE buffs before, such as drop rate tied to PvP, but what's new here is monster AP. I've recently been drawn to the attention of a metagame around trash per hour. While I don't personally get that, per se, what is important here is that these players feel they need to do Node Wars in order to be competitive in PvE. I don't want to get into specifics on my thoughts on that, but I do think the best thing would be to remove life skilling and PvE monster damage buffs from any rewards. PvP should be rewarding, but so much more in a material and a silver gain, and that is the potential income rather than anything that you may get because you've gotten some drop rate or monster damage. Number 4 is the regions. This is a lesser concern to any of the core mechanics I've already mentioned in the system, but I would have liked to have seen other regions tried out, such as Drigan, Odalita, Mount of Eternal Winter, Ulakita, Land of the Morning Light. This would have really added a fresh coat of paint to Node Wars, and I think can make a world of difference sometimes. I still do enjoy the more of the whole region being used in each Node War though, so it's not a huge criticism. That said, on a final point on this, and this is definitely a personal thing, I'd kind of preferred Valencia fighting area to be the first part of the region with Basilisk, Cadre, Centaurs, and Bashams rather than the deeper desert areas. Number 5 is the RBF feel. Calling PvP that isn't Red Battlefield RBF, it's kind of a common expression in the community to say something is chaotic and without any structure. This is what I hear Node Wars referred to. The reason being is a lack of a home base to anchor a guild or an alliance to. There's no fear of your defense crumbling when it comes to that, so you can go full offense against whichever guild holds the fort you want, and there's no real counterplay for the waves of players body throwing your fort to get the last hit. There are other points for both here, but I think this captures the general feelings of myself and also others I've talked to at all levels of Node Wars. So I want to talk about next is how I personally would change the Node War system, keeping in mind that I've heard many different solutions, and I do think some are good, but often I don't think they address enough of the issues and sometimes simply target 1 or 2 bugbears. I also hear many calls to scrap the entire new system. After all, at least for NA and EU players, it came from nowhere. However, I just don't think PA will want to scrap something they put this level of development time into creating, and so it's much more likely to hope that they listen to real feedback when it comes to the actual new system, how they could change it for the better. So how would I change the system? First, I would remove the timer system. Having your Node War finish at a random time or 20 minutes just because you're successful is not a good system. Now, I don't think you could just leave it there, otherwise people wouldn't bother until like the last 10 minutes of the Node War, and then once the Node War is about to end, they would then go for a fort, because otherwise you might just fight randomly like RBF until then. I also don't agree with just making every fort a question mark fort, which is a suggestion I hear a lot. The question mark means it's a random timer, could end at any time. This could still mean you end up with a very short Node War, and although I do think that would actually be a step up from having definite 20-minute ones, this does lead me to my second point, which is that instead of forts being available based on guilds signed up, every fort should be activated across the entire region. Instead of capturing and holding one fort, you should be able to capture as many as you can and hold. This could reward you heavily for great amounts of success if you're able to basically have a ton of different Node Wars, forts that are connected. If you have a bunch of them linked together, you could really like buff up the amount of rewards that you can scale up basically. And you could even have like honeypot nodes which are significantly more rewards. I think this conquest style could work because stronger guilds will try to expand and can be backdoored by weaker ones, as the territory you gain could mean that the thinner your guild is becoming, your guild is like basically spread too thin, and so you can't defend all these different nodes you've captured. To address the method of capture at the bases, I would say something similar to the RBF capture points. I think having a form of progress bar that is stopped when enemies are also in the base area would be the most fair. For example, you could use a 2-to-1 ratio. That is to say, if your guild has 20 players next to the base and the enemy has 10, then you're making capture progress. If it becomes 20 to 11, then progress is halted. But What do you guys think about the Node War changes? Let me know in the comments. I'm curious to see what the consensus is from other players. And as always, thank you for watching, and I'll catch you next time.